Welcome, traveler. Before we begin our journey backward in time, I want you to take a moment, a long, deep, steady breath, and simply let go of whatever the day has demanded of you. As you settle into your space, I invite you to dim the lights, adjust your blankets, and allow your posture to lose its hard edges, to soften and lose its tension. We are about to step out of the frantic current of the modern world, to turn off the bright screens and loud noises of today, and tune into a quieter frequency, one that belongs only to you and to the past. Make yourself perfectly comfortable, tune out the world, and just relax. It is always a quiet joy for us to know who is traveling alongside us into these deep, ancient realms. If you would like to, please share with us, down in the quiet space of the comments, which part of our vast, shared world you are tuning in from tonight. Knowing where you are listening from, which continent, which time zone, helps us visualize just how far these old, whispered stories are traveling, spanning oceans and crossing timelines to find you. And so, with your light dimmed and your mind open, let the world around you dissolve. As we return to the era of lost empires, profound philosophies, and legends written upon the wind and the water, our journey begins. Part 1. The quiet port and the whispers of the sea. Close your eyes, take a deep, steady breath, and let the frantic pace of the modern world gently slip away. Imagine, if you will, that the air around you is turning soft, warm, and heavy with the scent of salt water, damp earth, and the faint, sweet trace of burning sandalwood. The sun has long since dipped below the horizon, leaving behind a sky painted in the deepest shades of indigo and violet, and a lingering, bruised gold at the very edge of the earth. You are standing on the weathered wooden planks of a quiet jetty, somewhere along the sweeping coastlines of the ancient Eastern Hemisphere, a place where time does not rush, but rather rolls in and out, slow and predictable, like the evening tide. Below your feet, the dark water laps against the moss-covered timber. A rhythmic, soothing sound. Slap, murmur, retreat. Slap, murmur, retreat. It is a sound that has remained unchanged for thousands of years, long before empires were given names, and long after their grandest palaces crumbled back into the soil. The year is somewhere deep in the pre-1800s, an era when the world was still vast, mysterious, and connected not by wires, but by the invisible, shifting highways of the trade winds. If you listen closely, past the gentle sighing of the coastal breeze, you can almost hear the voices of the past. The murmurs of merchants, the quiet chants of traveling monks, and the creak of great wooden hulls settling into the harbor for the night. This is the threshold of the maritime Silk Road, a network of waters that band the great minds and civilizations of India, Southeast Asia, and the Far East into a silent, shared consciousness. In the stillness of this evening, the harbor is nearly empty, save for a single, majestic merchant vessel anchored a short distance from the shore. Its massive sails, which during the heat of the day caught the monsoon winds like the wings of a great bird, are now neatly furled against the tall bamboo masts. The ship rides low in the water, its belly filled with a treasure more precious than gold. Sacks of aromatic cloves from the distant Moluccas, bundles of raw cinnamon bark drying in the holds, and fine, translucent porcelain wrapped carefully in straw. If you look down the curve of the shoreline, you can see the faint, warm glimmers of the port town beginning to wake up in its own nocturnal way. Small oil lamps, filled with the pressed oil of coconuts, are being lit one by one inside modest wooden homes raised high on stilts to escape the high tide. The light they cast is soft, amber, and flickering, a stark contrast to the cold, unyielding brightness of our modern cities. The smoke from cooking fires drifts lazily through the palm fronds, carrying with it the comforting, earthy aroma of roasted spices, simmering rice, and dried fish. It is the smell of survival, of community, and of a life lived in perfect harmony with the natural rhythms of the land and the sea. You take a few slow steps down the jetty, your bare feet smoothing against the grain of the wood, feeling the residual warmth left behind by the fierce tropical sun that beat down hours ago. The air is cooling now, carried by a gentle land breeze that brings the scent of the deep jungle from the interior of the island. A mix of wet earth, crushed leaves, and night-blooming jasmine. The ancient thinkers of these coastal realms did not look at the ocean as a void, nor did they see it as a terrifying barrier that separated humanity. To them, the water was a grand connector, a fluid mirror that reflected the soul of anyone brave enough to trust its currents. They possessed a profound, almost mystical understanding of the tides. They knew that the ocean was a living, breathing entity, guided by the moon and the invisible hands of the seasonal monsoons. For 6 months of the year, the winds blew steadily from the southwest, pushing ships effortlessly toward the rich markets of the east. Then, with a patient turn of the earth, the winds would shift, blowing from the northeast, carrying those same travelers back to the shores of India and beyond. There was no need to fight the elements, no desire to conquer the natural world. True wisdom lay in knowing when to wait, and when to let the currents carry you forward. Let us drift slightly back in time, deeper into the lore of this water, to an empire that understood this philosophy better than any other. The legendary maritime hegemony of Srivijaya. For centuries, this elusive kingdom held no grand stone capitals in the interior, no massive land armies that marched across plains. Instead, its power was written entirely upon the water, centered around the strategic, narrow choke point we now call the Malacca Strait. It was an empire of ports, of rivers, and of moving fleets. A kingdom that mastered the art of observation. From their base on the rich island of Sumatra, the rulers of Srivijaya did not conquer through brute force. Instead, they offered safety. They cleared the waters of hidden reefs, established protected harbors, and built vast storehouses where merchants could wait out the changing monsoons in comfort. In return, every ship that passed through these straits paid a small, willing tribute. A share of their cargo, a token of respect. It was a system built on mutual reliance, a delicate balance that allowed wealth, culture, and ideas to flow through the region like water through a well-tended canal. If you were to walk through the bustling market squares of a Srivijayan port during the height of the trading season, your senses would be overwhelmed by the sheer diversity of the human experience. You would see Tamil merchants from southern India, clad in fine white cotton, discussing the price of textiles with Chinese traders in silk robes. You would hear the soft, melodic tones of old Malay blending seamlessly with the structured, sacred cadence of Sanskrit. It was a place where no one was a stranger, because everyone was a traveler. And yet, when night fell, the chaos of commerce would fade into a profound, contemplative silence. The merchants would retreat to their lodgings, and the true heart of the empire would reveal itself. The empire of Srivijaya was not merely a center of wealth, it was one of the most important seats of spiritual learning in the ancient world. Long before the grand universities of the West were conceived, thousands of scholars and monks journeyed across dangerous seas to settle here, in the quiet monasteries nestled deep within the tropical greenery. Imagine the journey of one such scholar, a young man who left his ancestral home in the fertile plains of Bengal, boarding a massive wooden vessel with nothing but a bronze water pot, a spare robe, and a hunger for understanding. For weeks, he endured the unpredictable moods of the ocean, the terrifying storms that made the ship toss like a leaf in the wind, the long days of absolute stillness where the water turned to glass and the heat was suffocating. He did not travel for gold or spices. He traveled for books. When he finally stepped off the ship onto the red soil of Sumatra, he found himself in a world that felt entirely sacred. Here, under the shade of massive banyan trees, stood monasteries built of dark timber and river stone. these quiet halls, over 1,000 monks studied the complex philosophies of the mind. They spent their days translating ancient texts from Sanskrit into local languages, debating the nature of existence, and practicing the art of mindfulness. The great Chinese traveler I Ching, who visited Srivijaya in the 7th century, wrote that the city was so vibrant with spiritual energy that a scholar could stay there for years, learning the true depths of the law before ever proceeding to the great monastic centers of India. As you stand on the jetty in our present journey, the night deepens, and the stars above become sharp, brilliant jewels scattered across an impossibly black velvet sky. Without the artificial glare of modern life, the night sky reveals its true majesty. The constellations bend and wheel across the heavens, acting as a massive, celestial map for the navigators below. These ancient sailors did not need compasses or sat-navs. They read the stars like an open book. A master navigator could stand on the deck of a ship at midnight, dip his hand into the cool ocean water to feel its temperature, look up at the position of the Southern Cross, and know exactly how many leagues remained until they reached the safety of the next bay. They understood the language of the clouds, the subtle changes in the color of the water, and even the behavior of the birds that nested on distant cliffs. It was an education born of absolute attention, a level of mindfulness that modern humans have largely forgotten. Let your mind drift to the physical reality of these grand voyages. The ships themselves were marvels of ancient engineering, built entirely without a single iron nail. Instead, the massive planks of tropical hardwood were stitched together using strong, flexible cords made from the fibers of coconut husks. It sounds fragile to our modern ears, accustomed to steel and iron, but it was a design of pure genius. When an iron-nailed ship struck a hidden coral reef or encountered a violent wave, the rigid metal would tear through the wood, causing catastrophic failure. But a stitched ship was flexible. It could bend, twist, and give way to the immense pressure of the water, absorbing the shock of the ocean before settling back into its true shape. There is a beautiful lesson in that ancient design, a philosophy of resilience through flexibility. The ancient builders knew that to survive the vastness of the world, one must not be rigid and unyielding. One must learn to flex with the forces that surround us, trusting that our core structure will bring us back to center once the storm has passed. Now, listen to the quiet sounds of the port once more. A gentle breeze rustles the heavy fronds of the coconut palms along the beach. A dry, rhythmic clatter that sounds almost like soft rain. In the distance, from one of the small houses on stilts, someone is playing a simple bamboo flute. The melody is slow, mournful, and repetitive, drifting out over the water, rising and falling with the wind. It is a song without words, passed down from parent to child for generations, telling the story of the sea, the home, and the long wait for those who have traveled far away. You can smell the damp earth now, as a light mist begins to rise from the coastal swamps, blanketing the roots of the mangroves in a soft, white shroud. The mangroves are the silent guardians of this coast. Their twisted, tangled roots reach down into the brackish mud, forming a dense underwater forest that protects the shoreline from the erosive power of the waves. In the darkness, tiny bioluminescent organisms in the water begin to glow, casting a faint, magical blue spark whenever a ripple disturbs the surface. Think of the treasures that moved along these routes. Not just the spices that flavored the royal courts of Rome and Chang'an, but the stories. A fable told by a storyteller in the markets of Persia would travel on the tongue of a sailor, changing slightly with every port, until it was told to a child in a village on the coast of Java. Philosophies of non-attachment, written in the quiet ashrams of India, found a second home in the mountain temples of Bali. The world was connected by a slow, deliberate thread of human connection. There was a dry wit to the old historians who recorded these times. They wrote of kings who were so wealthy they would throw solid gold bricks into the royal estuary every morning, declaring that they were paying their debt to the ocean spirits. When the king died, the bricks would be recovered from the mud and distributed to the poor. A poetic way of reminding the rulers that wealth belongs to no one, and that eventually everything returns to the depths from which it came. As the night moves toward its deepest hours, the merchant ship anchored in the harbor seems to grow even more still. A solitary watchman sits on the high-stained deck, his figure silhouetted against the starry sky. He keeps a small charcoal brazier lit beside him, using its warmth to ward off the damp chill of the night air. Every now and then, he lifts a heavy wooden mallet and strikes a small bronze gong. Bong! The deep, metallic sound travels perfectly across the flat water, letting the town know that the ship is safe, that the anchor holds, and that all is well in the world. The sound vibrates through the night, a reassuring pulse that marks the passage of time. You feel a deep sense of safety here, standing on the edge of this ancient world. A realization that despite the vastness of the oceans and the centuries that separate us, the fundamental needs of the human spirit have never changed. We all seek a safe harbor, a quiet place to rest when the day's labor is done, and a steady star to guide us home. Let your breathing slow down even further now, matching the rhythmic rise and fall of the tide against the shore. In, out, rise, full. The mist is growing thicker, softening the sharp edges of the world, turning the distant ship and the nearby palms into beautiful, dark silhouettes against the starry night. The air is perfectly still, the land breeze has died down, and the ocean has become a flawless, dark mirror reflecting the infinite beauty of the cosmos above. In this space, there is nothing you need to do. No problems you need to solve. No destinations you need to reach. You are simply a witness to the slow, beautiful story of the earth. A story written in water, sand, and starlight. The ancient empires have had their day. Their grand fleets have returned to the dust, but the peace of this quiet port remains, waiting for you whenever you need to remember the quiet depth of your own mind. Let yourself sink deeper into the warmth of this story. Feel the gentle rocking of the imaginary waves, the soft sigh of the night breeze, and the complete, unyielding stillness of the ancient world. The harbor is at peace. The ship is secure. The stars are bright. And the deep lore of the old world whispers that it is time, at last, to rest. As the final echoes of the ship's evening gong dissolve into the dark expanse of the coastal bay, you turn your back to the open sea, stepping off the weathered planks of the jetty and onto a narrow, beaten path that wends its way inland. Away from the salt-heavy air of the harbor, the world changes its tone. The vast, horizontal openness of the ocean gives way to the vertical majesty of the ancient interior. Hey, the great rivers of the Eastern Hemisphere serve as the true veins of the land. Slow, winding currents of fresh water that carry the melted snows of distant mountains down through emerald valleys to meet the waiting sea. You are moving along the banks of one of these ancient waterways, a river that has witnessed the rise and fall of countless dynastic houses, its waters thick with the fertile silt that gives life to millions. The air here is different. It is cooler, thicker with the scent of wet moss, decaying leaves, and the sharp, clean fragrance of wild ginger breaking through the undergrowth. The path beneath your feet is composed of packed red clay, smoothed over centuries by the passing of unnumbered travelers. Pilgrims, ascetics, and couriers carrying royal decrees wrapped in oiled silk. As you walk, the dense canopy of the tropical rainforest closes over your head, filtering the brilliant starlight into a soft, subterranean green glow. The jungle is far from silent, yet its sounds form a deeply comforting tapestry of white noise. The rhythmic, metallic trill of cicadas, the distant, guttural call of a tree frog, and the gentle, dry rustle of giant ferns brushing against one another in the dark. You follow the river's edge until you come across a small, low-slung riverboat moored quietly against a bank of weeping willows. Its hull is carved from a single, massive trunk of teak wood, dark with age and polished by the friction of 1,000 currents. A single boatman sits cross-legged at the bow, his head covered by a wide, conical hat woven from dried palm leaves. He does not speak as you approach, nor does he offer a formal greeting. In the pre-1800s world, words are used sparingly, saved for the preservation of sacred texts or the execution of law. Instead, he merely tilts his chin, gesturing for you to step aboard. You step into the shallow craft, feeling it rock gently beneath your weight. A subtle reminder of the fluid reality that governs this entire civilization. As you sit upon a woven mat of sweet-smelling seagrass, the boatman pushes off from the bank with a long, fire-hardened bamboo pole. The boat glides forward into the main current without a sound, slipping through the dark water like a shadow. The river is wide hay, its surface so smooth that it reflects the stars above with absolute clarity. Looking down over the edge of the wooden gunwale, it feels as though you are floating not upon water, but through the vast, empty spaces of the cosmos itself. As the boat carries you deeper into the interior, the forest recedes slightly, opening up into vast, terraced hillsides that sculpt the landscape as far as the eye can see. Even in the darkness of midnight, the shape of these rice terraces is unmistakable. They rise like a giant staircase, carved directly into the living rock of the mountains. This is the agricultural heart of the ancient Eastern kingdoms, a monument to human patience and collective labor. Every single terrace is a delicate, water-filled mirror, held in place by low walls of hand-packed clay and river stone. The engineering behind these fields is nothing short of miraculous. Long before the advent of modern machinery, these civilizations devised intricate networks of bamboo pipes, gravity-fed canals, and stone sluice gates that directed water from high mountain springs down through thousands of individual plots. It was a communal masterpiece. No single farmer could own the water. It had to be shared, passed down from the highest terrace to the lowest in a continuous, unselfish flow. The air here smells faintly of sweet, fermenting mud and young green stalks. A rich, comforting scent that signifies abundance and the deep security of a land that knows how to feed its children. There is an old story told by the chroniclers of the Javanese inland kingdoms regarding these fields. It was said that a king, eager to prove his absolute authority over his subjects, ordered his engineers to divert a sacred river away from the communal terraces to fill a massive, ornamental pleasure lake within his palace walls. The engineers obeyed, fearing for their lives, and for a short season, the king's lake was the wonder of the region, filled with lotus blossoms and royal swans. But within a single harvest cycle, the fields below withered, the people grew hungry, and the silence of the countryside became heavier than the loudest rebellion. One night, the king looked out over his magnificent lake and realized that the water had turned stagnant, green, and foul-smelling, while the grand stone walls of his palace began to crack as the soil beneath them dried out. Realizing his folly, he walked out into the night without his crown, took up a simple wooden shovel, and personally broke the stone dam he had ordered built. The water rushed back to the valleys, the terraces woke up once more, and the king learned the ultimate lesson of the East, that a ruler's power is not measured by what he can contain, but by what he allows to flow. The riverboat glides past the terraced hills, turning into a narrower branch of the river where the current slows to a crawl. The trees return, but they are different now. Older, more deliberate in their growth. Massive wild ficus and banyan trees line the banks, their aerial roots hanging down into the water like long, gray hair. You have arrived at the outer boundaries of a sacred forest sanctuary, a place set aside by royal decree as a refuge for meditation, study, and the preservation of knowledge. The boatman guides the craft toward a low stone landing stage, overgrown with soft green liverworts and moss. You step out, your feet meeting the cool, solid stone, and look up a grand staircase that disappears into the misty woods. Each step is wide and shallow, carved from dark volcanic rock that has been smoothed by the bare feet of countless scholars over hundreds of years. The air here feels charged with an intense, academic stillness, a quiet that is not empty, but rather pregnant with the weight of centuries of deep thought. As you ascend the staircase, the trees part to reveal a cluster of low, elegant pavilions built entirely of dark, oil-rubbed timber and red clay tiles. This is a forest university, a scriptorium where the wisdom of the ancient world is meticulously copied, translated, and preserved. In the pre-1800s Eastern Hemisphere, these institutions were the true pillars of civilization. Hidden away from the political turmoil of the courts, they served as safe harbors for the human mind. Through the open lattice windows of the largest pavilion, you can see the warm, steady glow of oil lamps. You step closer, moving as quietly as a ghost, and peer inside. The room is vast, its floor covered in pristine straw mats. Dozens of scholars sit in absolute silence, arranged in long rows. Some are young, their faces smooth and intense with concentration. Others are old, their backs bent from a lifetime spent leaning over manuscripts, their long gray beards reaching almost to their laps. There is no sound in the room save for the soft, dry scratch of styluses against dried leaves, a sound that resembles the chewing of silkworms on mulberry leaves. You watch as an elder scholar prepares his materials. The medium of choice here is not paper, which decays quickly in the humid tropical air, but the hardy leaves of the talipot palm. These are the famous Ola manuscripts. The preparation of a single leaf is an art form in itself. First, the long, fan-like leaves are cut from the tree and boiled in water to soften their fibers. Then, they are dried under the shade of a canopy, pressed smooth using heavy rollers made of ironwood, and cut into neat, rectangular strips. The scholar takes a single strip of palm leaf, holding it flat against a small wooden desk. Using a sharp steel stylus, he does not write with ink. Instead, he scratches the delicate characters directly into the surface of the leaf. His hand moves with incredible precision, his fingers guiding the steel tool with a fluid grace born of decades of daily practice. One wrong move, one slip of the hand, and the entire leaf would be ruined. Yet there is no hesitation in his movement. He is in a state of perfect flow, completely dissolved into the text he is bringing into physical form. The texts being copied here are as diverse as the minds that conceived them. There are treatises on advanced mathematics, systems of astronomy that map the movement of the planets with startling accuracy, manuals of traditional medicine detailing the healing properties of thousands of jungle plants, and profound works of philosophy that attempt to answer the oldest questions of human consciousness. There is a wonderful, dry humor to the notes left behind by these ancient copyists in the margins of their books. In one manuscript, after translating a particularly long and dense passage of logic, a scribe wrote in tiny letters at the bottom of the leaf, "The sun is rising. The oil in my lamp is gone. My back feels like a broken branch." If the reader does not understand this chapter, let him blame the author, for I have written exactly what he said, even though it makes less sense than the chattering of monkeys. It is a brief, human voice reaching out across hundreds of years, reminding us that behind these grand monuments of thought were real people, tired, cold, and possessed of a healthy skepticism. You move away from the scriptorium, walking out into a central courtyard where a group of older monks are sitting in a circle on the stone flags. They are engaged in the art of philosophical debate, a practice that in the East was treated not as a combat of egos, but as a collaborative tool for clearing away illusion. The debate is carried out in low, conversational tones. There is no shouting, no anger, no desperate need to be right. One philosopher poses a question about the nature of time. To the modern world, time is an arrow, flying straight from the past into the future. A scarce resource to be managed, measured, and spent. But to these thinkers, sitting under the stars in the pre-1800s, time was a vast, wheeling mandala, a series of repeating cycles within cycles. They spoke of yugas, immense epochs of time that lasted for millions of years, during which civilizations rose, reached their peak, degenerated into chaos, and were quietly dissolved back into the cosmic source before the cycle began anew. In such a worldview, there was no room for anxiety. The current moment was merely a single drop in an infinite ocean. From the courtyard, you can see the dark silhouette of the university's central temple rising against the mountain backdrop. Its architecture is a stunning display of sacred geometry, built in the style of the great stone monuments of central Java or southern India. It is a step pyramid, constructed without mortar, its thousands of volcanic stone blocks held together by a complex system of interlocking joints. As you walk toward it, you notice that every single square inch of the stone walls is covered in intricate bas-relief carvings. If you run your hand along the stone, you can feel the texture of the stories. Here's a panel showing a queen traveling in a grand carriage. There's a carving of an elephant clearing a path through the jungle. And next to it, a representation of the cosmic ocean being churned by gods and demons to produce the nectar of immortality. The temple was not just a place of worship, it was a physical library. A three-dimensional stone book that could be read by anyone, lettered or unlettered, simply by walking around its terraces in a clockwise direction. You climb to the highest terrace of the temple, standing among the massive stone bells, or stupas, that crowned the structure. Inside each bell sits a stone statue of a seated sage, his hands folded in a gesture of peace, looking out over the silent valley with an expression of absolute serenity. The view from here is breathtaking. The mist has settled into the low valleys, turning the jungle below into a white, undulating sea from which the tops of the highest trees emerge like lonely islands. The philosophy of these builders was rooted in the concept of the microcosm and the macrocosm. They believed that the human body, the temple, the kingdom, and the universe were all reflections of the same underlying order. By building a temple that perfectly mimicked the geometry of the cosmos, they believed they were anchoring that cosmic peace down into the very soil of their kingdom. It was an attempt to create a space where the chaotic movements of human history could be brought into alignment with the steady, unchanging harmony of the stars. Standing on this high terrace, the world feels incredibly ancient, yet entirely fresh. The damp, cool night air brushes against your face, carrying the scent of wild orchids and wet stone. You realize that the people who built these libraries, who carved these stones, and who traveled these rivers did not view themselves as masters of nature. They did not seek to pave over the earth or tame the wilderness. Instead, they sought to understand their place within it. They knew that kingdoms would eventually fall, that the jungle would grow back over the stone terraces, and that the palm leaves would eventually crumble into dust. But they also knew that the truths they had discovered, the nature of the mind, the beauty of compassion, and the deep peace of stillness, were eternal. They were writing not for their own glory, but for you, so that thousands of years later, an individual sitting in a completely different world could look back, listen to their words, and find the same harbor of peace. The night is beginning to turn. The deep, solid black of midnight is softening into a cool, translucent gray along the eastern ridge of the mountains. The stars are starting to fade, one by one, like candles being extinguished at the end of a long vigil. Below in the pavilions, the copyists are finally setting down their styluses, blowing out the oil lamps, and wrapping themselves in their simple cotton shawls to catch a few hours of sleep before the morning sun calls them back to their duties. Let your own thoughts settle now. as the ancient university slips into its well-earned rest. The rivers continue to flow. The rice fields drink the mountain water. The manuscripts sit safe within their wooden chests. And the stone sages keep their eternal watch over the valley. Everything is in its proper place. Everything is in alignment. And the deep wisdom of the forest whispers that you, too, are exactly where you need to be. Let go of the world. Let go of the hour. And drift down into the quiet depths of sleep. Let the soft green shadows of the forest river valley fade gently from your mind now, as we begin a slow, patient ascent into a completely different landscape, one where the earth turns from deep, damp soil into ancient, sun-baked stone and ochre clay. We are moving up into the high, rugged plateaus that form the formidable spine of the inland trade routes. A vast, elevated world where the air grows noticeably crisper, thinner, and carries the sharp, wild scent of mountain juniper, dry dust, and the deep, silent chill of the upper atmosphere. The year remains suspended in the quiet pre-1800s, an epoch when crossing a mountain range was not a matter of hours, but an epic journey of weeks, a true test of human endurance, patience, and faith. You are walking along a narrow, winding mountain trail, a path cut directly into the flank of a massive sandstone cliff face. Below you, a deep gorge drops away into absolute darkness, where the distant, muffled roar of a glacial river can be heard, sounding like a constant, soothing rush of static electricity. Above you, the jagged peaks of the mountains rise like giant, sleeping guardians against the deep velvet sky, their snowy caps catching the faint, cool radiance of a rising moon. The ground beneath your feet is composed of loose gravel and hard, weather-beaten rock. Every step requires your full awareness, yet there is a strange, profound peace in this deliberate movement, a sense of leaving all the unnecessary noise of the lower valleys far behind you. As you round a sharp bend in the path, the silence of the high peaks is gently broken by a familiar, deeply comforting sound. The slow, rhythmic tinkle of small brass bells. It is the voice of a caravan, moving ahead of you at a patient, unhurried pace. You slow your steps to match their rhythm, watching as a long line of heavy pack animals, sturdy mountain horses and shaggy, two-humped Bactrian camels, tread carefully along the ledge. Their breath forms soft, white plumes of steam in the chilly night air, their great chests rising and falling in a steady, synchronized cadence. These animals are the true lifeblood of the overland trade networks, carrying the wealth of nations across deserts and over frozen passes that would break any modern machine. They are laden with heavy bales of raw silk wrapped in coarse wool, blocks of dark tea pressed into hard bricks for easy transport, and small, iron-bound chests containing precious blue lapis lazuli from the mines of Badakhshan. The caravan handlers walk beside them, men with weather-lined faces wrapped in thick felt cloaks, their hands calloused from ropes, their eyes long accustomed to staring at distant horizons. They do not speak, they simply walk, trusting the ancient instinct of their beasts to find the path through the darkness. There is a profound philosophy born of these high-altitude paths, an understanding that when you climb into the heavens, you must shed everything that is not absolutely essential to your survival. The ascetics and hermits who choose to make these desolate heights their permanent home understood this better than anyone. They looked at the crowded, chaotic cities of the plains, with their endless politics, their fierce competitions, and their fleeting anxieties, and they chose instead the absolute, unyielding clarity of the stone. To these ancient thinkers, the mountain was a physical representation of the spiritual journey. The higher you climb, the steeper the path becomes, the thinner the air, and the more solitary the road. And yet, the reward was an unmatched clarity of vision, a space where the mind could finally settle down, free from the distractions of the senses, and become as vast, open, and still as the sky itself. They did not view the isolation as a punishment, but as the ultimate luxury. A safe harbor where one could look down upon the movements of human history with an objective, compassionate eye. The caravan before you begins to slow down, its leaders guiding the lead animals off the main trail and toward a massive, horseshoe-shaped cliff face that dominates the valley ahead. As you draw closer, you realize that this is no ordinary mountain wall. The entire cliffside has been meticulously transformed by the hands of human artists and devotees over the course of centuries. It is honeycombed with thousands of rock-cut caves, their elegant stone facades carved directly into the living rock, rising tier upon tier like a grand, subterranean palace. This is a sanctuary of stone, a massive monastic complex built at the crossroads of the trade routes, serving as both a spiritual powerhouse and a vital refuge for weary travelers. The architecture here is unique. It is not built from the ground up by stacking stones, but created through the process of subtraction, by carving away the mountain itself to create hollow spaces of pure symmetry. The builders did not create structure. They created a sacred void, a series of quiet wombs inside the earth where the noise of the external world could never penetrate. You leave the caravan as they begin to unpack their animals in the large stone courtyard at the base of the cliff, and you ascend a series of broad, rock-cut steps leading toward one of the largest cave entrances. The mouth of the cave is shaped like a grand, arched window, designed to catch the very first rays of the morning sun. As you step across the threshold and into the interior, the temperature drops immediately, replaced by a cool, stable climate that remains constant regardless of the fierce heat of summer or the bitter freeze of winter. The air inside is thick with history, smelling faintly of aged clarified butter used in the ceremonial lamps, the sweet, resinous drift of guggle incense, and the cold, mineral scent of damp sandstone. You walk into a grand chaitya hall, a long, pillared nave that stretches deep into the heart of the mountain. On either side of you, rows of massive stone pillars rise up to meet a curved, barrel-vaulted ceiling. The pillars are carved with astonishing detail, their capitals decorated with figures of elephants, mythical creatures, and kneeling devotees, all holding up the immense weight of the mountain above with an appearance of effortless grace. You walk slowly down the central aisle, your footsteps making no sound against the smooth, stone floor. As your eyes adjust to the low, flickering lamplight, you realize that the walls around you are completely covered in brilliant, ancient frescoes. These paintings are a vibrant explosion of color in the midst of the dark stone, created using natural mineral pigments ground down from rocks. Lapis lazuli for the deep blues, malachite for the rich greens, and local ochres for the warm yellows and reds. The paintings depict the endless, winding stories of the Jataka tales, the previous lives of the Buddha before he attained ultimate liberation. In one panel, you see a compassionate prince giving away his wealth to the poor. In another, a majestic golden deer rescuing a drowning man from a raging river. The figures are painted with a remarkable fluidity and grace, their bodies bending like willow branches, their expressions filled with a profound, quiet emotion. Despite the hundreds of years that have passed since the artist's brush touched these walls, the colors remain startlingly alive, glowing softly in the dark like memories that refuse to fade. There is a delightful, dry wit to the ancient records left behind by the administrators of these cave complexes. In the old copperplate inscriptions that record the donations made to the monastery, you can find accounts of wealthy merchants who gave large sums of money not out of pure spiritual devotion, but as a highly practical tax write-off or to ensure their commercial competitors didn't outshine them in the eyes of the public. One inscription details a merchant from a nearby city who donated an entire village's tax revenue to buy oil for the cave's lamps. adding a very specific clause at the end stating that if the monks ever failed to keep his specific lamps lit, the merit of their prayers would automatically revert to his business partners. It is a wonderfully human reminder that even in these spaces of sublime spiritual focus, the practical, calculating mind of the marketplace was never entirely absent. The ancient historians recorded these details with a quiet chuckle, knowing that human nature is always a complex mix of the sacred and the ordinary. At the very end of the long hall, emerging directly out of the dark stone at the back of the cave, stands a colossal statue of the great teacher. He is carved in a seated position, his legs crossed, his hands held in the Dhammachakra mudra, the gesture of turning the wheel of the law. The statue is immense, its head reaching almost to the high ceiling. Yet it does not feel imposing or terrifying. The lighting is designed with absolute genius. A single, small opening high up in the cave facade allows a beam of cool moonlight to penetrate the darkness, striking the face of the statue with perfect precision. The stone features are carved with a sublime, timeless serenity. The eyes are half-closed, looking down at the empty hole with an expression of infinite compassion and absolute peace. The lips are curved into a very faint, subtle smile. A smile that seems to say that all the struggles, all the anxieties, and all the grand dramas of the world are ultimately nothing more than a passing dream. As you stand before this giant figure, the chatter of your own mind grows quiet, completely absorbed into the monumental stillness of the stone. Leaving the main sanctuary hall, you wander down a side corridor that leads to the residential quarters of the monks, the viharas. These are small, austere cells cut into the rock, each containing nothing more than a raised stone bed platform, a small alcove for an oil lamp, and a narrow window looking out over the valley. Hey, the monks lived a life of absolute simplicity. The days divided between meditation, the study of the manuscripts, and the practical care of the caravans. This coexistence of commerce and contemplation was the true secret behind the success of the Silk Routes. The monastery was not an isolated fortress. It was an active economic hub. The monks acted as trusted bankers, keeping the merchants' wealth safe in their deep stone vaults. They served as doctors, using their extensive knowledge of herbal medicine to heal sick travelers, and they provided a reliable sanctuary where competitors could meet on neutral ground to negotiate contracts under the peaceful gaze of the statues. It was a system where everyone benefited, a beautiful alignment of material need and spiritual purpose. You walk out onto one of the open stone balconies that connect the different levels of the caves, leaning your arms against the cool stone railing. Outside, the mountain wind has begun to pick up, a low, hollow howl that echoes through the jagged peaks and sweeps across the valley floor. It is a cold, fierce wind that would freeze a person to the bone within minutes. Yet here, protected by the deep stone walls of the mountain, you feel completely warm, secure, and detached from the elements. The contrast is beautiful. Outside, the world is wild, changing, and full of force. Inside, the space is absolute, unmoving, and perfectly quiet. The ancient architects understood how to use the mountain as a shield, creating an acoustic masterpiece where the howling wind outside is transformed into a faint, soothing murmur by the time it reaches the interior chambers. It reminds you of the capacity of your own mind to create an inner sanctuary so deep and so secure that the storms of the external world can only brush against the surface without ever disturbing the core peace. Looking up from the balcony, the sky over the high plateaus is an awe-inspiring spectacle. The air at this altitude is so clean, so free from moisture and dust, that the stars do not merely twinkle, they burn with a steady, fierce brilliance. The Milky Way stretches across the heavens like a massive, glowing river of diamond dust, cutting the cosmos in two. To the ancient astronomers who lived in these mountain sanctuaries, the stars were the ultimate proof of an underlying cosmic order. They spent their nights on these high balconies, using simple brass instruments to measure the precise angles of the stars, mapping the slow, majestic dance of the planets across the zodiac. They understood that the universe was not a chaotic accident, but a grand, beautiful symphony operating on laws that were completely unchanging. By aligning their own lives with this cosmic rhythm, they found a sense of permanence and security that no earthly kingdom could ever provide. You descend the rock-cut steps once more, returning to the large courtyard where the caravan has settled in for the night. The pack animals are resting on the ground, their long legs tucked beneath them, chewing their cud with a slow, grinding patience. The handlers have gathered in the center of the yard, building a small, bright campfire using dry scrub wood and animal dung. The flames cast long, dancing shadows against the massive stone facade of the caves behind them. The travelers sit closely together around the fire, passing around a large copper kettle filled with hot, dark tea boiled with salt and rich yak butter. A heavy, nourishing drink that cuts through the mountain chill. They are sharing stories, not of grand political events, but of the simple realities of the road. A hidden water hole discovered in the desert, a close escape from a group of bandits in the lower passes, a legendary horse that could predict the coming of a snowstorm days in advance. Their voices are low, calm, and filled with the unique camaraderie of those who share the dangers of the long highway. There is a profound lesson in the very nature of this stone sanctuary. The people who carved these caves did so with an eye toward eternity. They knew that a building made of wood or brick would eventually bang, rot, or be pulled down by conquerors. But to destroy a temple carved into a mountain, you would have to destroy the mountain itself. They were creating a permanent archive of human wisdom. And yet, if you look closely at the edges of the oldest carvings, you can see the soft, inexorable work of time. The sharp lines of the stone faces have been slightly rounded by the blowing dust of centuries. A footstep here has worn a gentle hollow into a threshold. A drop of water from a hidden spring has carved a tiny groove down a pillar. The ancient sages did not despair at this. They knew that even the mountains would eventually turn back to dust, and that true immortality belongs not to the stone, but to the awareness that recognizes the beauty within it. The fire in the courtyard is beginning to die down now, the bright flames collapsing into a bed of glowing, crimson embers that pulse softly in the dark like a steady heartbeat. The caravan handlers wrap themselves tightly in their heavy wool cloaks, leaning their heads against their packs, closing their eyes as they prepare for the long, hard climb that awaits them at dawn. The pack animals have grown completely still, their quiet breathing filling the courtyard with a peaceful, rhythmic sigh. Let your own awareness settle down into this deep, protective silence. The mountain stands firm. The caves hold the ancient secrets. The colossal statue keeps its eternal, compassionate smile. And the stars continue their silent, majestic journey across the heavens. You are safe. You are protected. Wrapped in the immense, unyielding peace of the ancient stone. Let go of the miles. Let go of the day. And drift down into the quiet, deep sanctuary of sleep. Part 4. The desert oasis and the subterranean waters of life. As the glowing crimson embers of the mountain campfire fade into memory, we begin a long, slow descent from the rugged stone peaks, down into a vast, silent basin where the mountains crumble away into a sea of shifting sand. The crisp, freezing air of the high altitudes gradually warms, turning into a dry, heavy stillness that carries the ancient, mineral scent of the deep desert. You are entering a realm where the horizon stretches infinitely in every direction. A landscape of monumental emptiness that has humbled travelers, kings, and mystics since the dawn of memory. The year remains suspended in the quiet pre-1800s, an era when the desert was not an empty void to be flown over, but a grand, golden ocean that demanded absolute reverence. A place where every step across the dunes was a conscious choice to trust the hidden patterns of the earth. You are walking along the spine of a massive sand dune at midnight. Your feet sink softly into the fine, cool sand, which has shed the scorching heat of the afternoon sun to become as refreshing as mountain snow. The wind has died down to a faint, rhythmic whisper. A low, sibilant sound as tiny grains of quartz slide down the face of the dune. Hush, drift, settle. Hush, drift, settle. Above you, the night sky is an absolute masterpiece. Free from the humidity of the valleys and the obstruction of the peaks, the stars burn with a terrifying, beautiful clarity. Looking down upon the vast dune sea like countless ancient eyes. If you listen with a quiet mind, past the gentle rustle of the sand, you can feel the unique stillness of this landscape. A peace born not from the abundance of life, but from its absolute simplification. You follow the downward curve of the dune ridge, guided by a faint, warm cluster of light shimmering in the distance like a fallen constellation. This is no mirage. It is a legendary oasis city-state. A miraculous green island anchored in the midst of a barren desert basin. To the uninitiated, the existence of a thriving city in such a desolate place seems like an impossibility, an illusion born of heat and exhaustion. But to the ancient engineers who built this sanctuary, it was a triumph of observation and profound patience. They understood that in the desert, the true source of life does not fall from the sky. It flows silently beneath the earth. Long before the modern world devised its complex networks of iron pipes, these desert civilizations looked at the parched landscape and realized that the melted snows from the distant mountains did not simply vanish when they reached the desert fringe. Instead, the water sank deep into the porous gravel beds, flowing along hidden, subterranean pathways beneath the burning sands. To tap into this invisible treasure, they created the Carrez or Canat system, an astonishing network of hand-dug underground aqueducts that stretched for tens of miles beneath the dunes. It was an engineering marvel built entirely in the dark, a series of gently sloping tunnels cut through the earth by generations of diggers who worked by the faint light of oil lamps, ensuring that the precious water could flow from the mountain roots directly to the city gates without ever losing a single drop to the evaporating heat of the desert sun. You reach the outer perimeter of the oasis, where the cool, damp breath of the underground waters rises through stone ventilation shafts, mixing with the dry air of the desert. The transition is sudden and magical. One moment you are standing on the barren, shifting sand, and the next, your feet touch solid, hand-packed clay, and the air becomes sweet with the scent of wet soil, rustling vegetation, and the rich, green fragrance of ancient date palms. You walk past the massive, sun-dried mud brick walls of the city, walls that have been coated in a smooth layer of protective plaster made from river silt and straw, catching the pale silver radiance of the moon. The architecture here is an organic extension of the earth itself. Low, flat-roofed homes and elegant arched gateways built from the very soil they stand upon, designed with thick, heavy walls that act as a natural thermal barrier, keeping the interior spaces incredibly cool during the fierce heat of the day and releasing that trapped warmth slowly during the freezing desert nights. There are no grand stone palaces here, for wood and stone are rare luxuries in this arid basin. Yet there is a sublime, minimalist beauty in these mud brick structures. Their soft, rounded contours blending seamlessly into the shapes of the surrounding dunes, as if the city itself were merely a permanent wave in the golden sea of sand. You step through the open gateway and enter the silent heart of the oasis. The narrow streets are completely empty, winding between the high walls of residential courtyards in a deliberate, maze-like pattern designed to break the force of the seasonal dust storms. As you walk, you notice the profound philosophy that this landscape instilled into the minds of its inhabitants. To the thinkers of the desert oases, existence was defined by the delicate balance between the visible and the hidden. They looked at the vast, outer desert as the world of illusion, a place of shifting sands, deceptive mirages, and impermanent forms where nothing stays the same for long. Conversely, they viewed the inner oasis, the quiet, hidden spaces behind the mud brick walls where the waters flowed, as the realm of truth, stability, and the spirit. This understanding gave rise to a unique school of philosophy that emphasized inner cultivation over external display. They taught that a human being should be like an oasis, presenting a calm, simple, and unpretentious exterior to the world, while maintaining a deep, subterranean reservoir of wisdom and peace within. It was a philosophy of non-attachment, a recognition that the external structures of society are as fleeting as the shapes the wind carves into the dunes, and that true security can only be found by tapping into the unchanging, invisible currents of the soul. The narrow street leads you to a large, central square where the main Carres channel emerges into the open air, emptying into a beautiful, circular stone basin, surrounded by a grove of ancient pomegranate and fig trees. Here, in the quietest hours of the night, stands the great academy and repository of the Oasis, a place known across the ancient trade routes as a sanctuary for books that would perish in the damp, humid climates of the coastal kingdoms. The dry, stable air of the desert basin acts as a natural preservative, a perfect shield against the rut, mold, and insects that destroy the records of human thought elsewhere. Through the low, arched doorway of the archive, you can see the faint, warm flicker of a sesame oil lamp. You enter quietly, your bare feet smoothing against the cool, terracotta floor tiles. The room is a treasure house of global memory, wrapped in a profound, academic stillness. Long shelves made of fragrant cedar would stretch from floor to ceiling, packed not just with palm leaves, but with vast bundles of early paper manuscripts, parchment scrolls, and silk books bound in weathered leather. This oasis was a vital node on the Silk Road, a place where the intellectual currents of different civilizations met, mingled, and were quietly filed away for posterity. You walk along the shelves, amazed by the sheer diversity of the scripts gathered in this single room. Here are early Buddhist sutras written in the Khotanese language on fine mulberry paper. Next to them sit Nestorian Christian texts in Syriac script, fragments of Manichaean hymns painted with brilliant gold leaf, and meticulous astronomical tables calculated by Persian mathematicians using early Arabic numerals. The scholars who lived in this oasis did not see these different traditions as contradictory. To them, they were simply different languages attempting to describe the same starry sky. There is a wonderful, dry wit to the administrative logs kept by the ancient librarians who managed this vast collection. In one weathered ledger, written in a beautiful cursive script, an old accountant recorded the expenses for the maintenance of the scholars' lodgings, listing the precise amounts of flour, dried mutton, and oil consumed by a visiting delegation of dialecticians. At the end of the month's entry, the librarian added a weary, handwritten note. The scholars from the West have spent the last 14 days arguing over whether the void has an independent existence or is merely the absence of form. Meanwhile, they have consumed 3 entire baskets of our best winter dates and used double their allowance of lamp oil. I have suggested to the director that next time they wish to debate the void, they should do so out in the dunes, where the void is entirely free of charge. It is a charmingly human voice reaching out across the centuries, reminding us that intellectual pursuits have always been accompanied by the practical realities of daily life. You leave the main hall of the archive, walking out into the enclosed garden courtyard that forms the spiritual center of the academy. The garden is a masterpiece of sensory design, a small, deliberate paradise created in the midst of the wilderness. Heavy clusters of dark purple grapes hang from overhead wooden trellises, their leaves rustling softly in the midnight breeze. The ground is covered in a lush carpet of green clover, cooled by tiny stone channels that distribute water from the central basin to the roots of every plant. The scent here is intoxicating. A rich, layered fragrance of damp earth, mint, sweet fig leaves, and the subtle, powdery smell of night-blooming dust lilies. In the center of the courtyard sits a small, rectangular reflection pool, its surface so perfectly still that it acts as a flawless mirror for the night sky. As you stand at the edge of the water, looking down, you can see the entire constellation of Orion reflected in the dark depths, creating a beautiful illusion that you are standing on a narrow bridge between two identical universes, one above and one below. From the courtyard garden, a narrow spiral staircase built inside a sturdy mud brick tower leads up to the roof of the academy. You ascend the stairs, feeling the air grow slightly crisper as you rise above the level of the surrounding walls. Reaching the flat, open roof, you find yourself at the highest point of the oasis, looking out over a panoramic view of the entire basin. The sight is awe-inspiring. The green canopy of the oasis palms forms a dark, protective circle around the city, beyond which the immense, pale waves of the sand dunes stretch out into the darkness like a frozen ocean. This rooftop served as the primary observatory for the desert astronomers. In this arid environment, where clouds are a rare phenomenon and the air is perfectly dry, the sky provides an unparalleled window into the movements of the cosmos. The astronomers who gathered here did not view the night sky as a distant, abstract space. To them, the movement of the stars was directly connected to the survival of their civilization. By tracking the precise position of the sun against the constellations, they could predict the exact day the mountain snows would begin to melt, allowing the city to prepare the subterranean channels for the coming rush of water. They were reading the sky to sustain the life of the earth. There's a legendary piece of folklore associated with this desert basin, a phenomenon known to the ancient travelers as the singing sands. On certain nights, when the wind blows from a specific direction across the high crests of the outer dunes, the entire desert begins to emit a deep, hollow, and resonant sound. A low, musical booming that can last for hours, sounding like the distant vibration of 1,000 bronze harps or the deep chant of a monastic choir. To the ancient caravan handlers, this sound was a source of great mystery and fear. They believed it was the voices of ancient spirits, the inhabitants of forgotten empires that had been buried beneath the sand thousands of years ago, trying to communicate with the living world. But the philosophers of the oasis had a more poetic interpretation. They believed that the desert was a massive, musical instrument played by the hand of the wind, and that the singing sands were a reminder that even the most barren, desolate places on earth carry a hidden harmony. A beautiful song that can only be heard by those who are willing to enter into absolute silence. You look down from the roof into the grand courtyard of the city's central caravanserai, the massive stone in where the merchants and their pack animals rest after their long journeys across the sand. The scene below is peaceful and domestic. Dozens of large, double-humped camels are resting in neat rows around the perimeter of the yard, their long necks curved gracefully against their bodies as they sleep. The heavy merchant packs, filled with precious silks, spices, and jade, have been stacked in secure piles in the center of the court, covered in heavy felt blankets to protect them from the midnight dew. A few remaining caravan guards are sitting near the heavy wooden gates, passing around a small, unglazed clay pipe filled with aromatic mountain herbs. Their conversation is sparse, carried out in low, rhythmic whispers that blend into the rustle of the palms. They are discussing the quality of the water in the next oasis, 3 days' journey to the east, and whether the shifting dunes have covered the old trail through the salt flats. They do not speak with anxiety. They speak with the calm, practical confidence of people who know that the desert is a strict but predictable master, one that rewards patience, humility, and absolute attention to detail. There's a profound lesson in the very existence of this mudbrick city. The people who lived here knew that their home was a fragile creation, a tiny pocket of green surrounded by an immense, unyielding wilderness. They knew that if they ever failed to maintain the subterranean channels, if they ever allowed greed or conflict to disrupt the collective labor required to clear the sand from the ventilation shafts, the desert would reclaim the oasis within a single season. This constant awareness of impermanence did not make them anxious. Instead, it made them deeply appreciative of the present moment. It taught them to value every drop of water, every leaf of a manuscript, and every hour of peaceful conversation. They lived with a heightened sense of gratitude, knowing that the beauty surrounding them was a collective masterpiece, held in place by human ingenuity and a deep respect for the laws of nature. It is a stark reminder to our modern minds, which often take abundance for granted, that the most beautiful things in life are often those that require our constant care, cooperation, and protection. The deepest hours of the night are now beginning to pass. The intense, velvety blackness of the sky is turning into a soft, translucent charcoal along the eastern edge of the desert basin. The stars are beginning to lose their sharp, diamond brilliance, fading slowly into the rising light like drops of water disappearing into a dry sponge. A cool, pre-dawn wind sweeps across the roof, carrying the sharp, fresh scent of the open sand and the clean promise of a new day. Below in the streets of the oasis, the small oil lamps are flickering out one by one. The scholars in the library are closing their cedar chests. The caravan guards are setting down their pipes, and the great mud-brick city is settling into its quietest, most restful hour before the morning sun calls the world back to its labors. Let your own mind settle into this deep, protective silence. The subterranean waters continue to flow. The dates hang heavy on the palms. The ancient scrolls sit safe on their cedar shelves, and the great desert keeps its eternal, harmonious watch. You are safe. You are at peace, wrapped in the immense, golden quiet of the oasis night. Let go of the journey. Let go of the hour, and drift down into the restful depths of sleep. Part 5. The Frontier of the Moon and the River of Yellow Earth. As the deep, golden silence of the desert oasis fades from your mind, we begin a slow, patient journey eastward, moving out of the endless sea of shifting sand dunes and into a vast, rugged transition zone where the earth turns from gold to a dusty, reddish-brown clay. The air here is thin, dry, and carries the sharp, ancient scent of cold stone, sun-baked earth, and the faint, bitter trace of wild sagebrush. We are approaching the edge of a different kind of world. Not an empire of water and oases, but an empire of structured earth and ancient frontos. The year is still suspended in the quiet, pre-1800s, an epoch when the borders of civilizations were not mere lines on a map, but massive, physical structures that required constant, human attention. A time when the gap between the familiar and the unknown was guarded by lonely men on high walls. You are walking along an ancient, packed earth patrol path at midnight, your feet sinking slightly into the dust that has accumulated over centuries of military focus. The moon is high and full, casting a stark, cool silver radiance over a landscape of jagged, eroded hills and deep, silent canyons. If you look ahead, you can see it, rising and falling along the very spine of the mountain ridges like a giant, sleeping serpent. The Great Wall. Not the grand stone structure of modern photographs, but the older, rammed earth frontier of this pre-1800s era. It is a monumental barrier made of soil, gravel, and reeds, packed so tightly inside wooden frames that it has become as hard as stone, catching the pale moonlight and casting a shadow that stretches miles across the valley floor. It is a wall born of patience and collective labor, a testament to civilization's desire to define its own edges against the vast, chaotic flow of the northern steppes. You follow the wall as it curves toward a massive, square watchtower that anchors this section of the frontier. It is built of sun-dried bricks and heavy timber, its high walls catching the cold night wind. And from its highest window, a faint, warm cluster of light flickers, a solitary signal fire kept burning through the dark. You ascend the narrow, worn stone steps leading to the tower's entrance, feeling the air grow cooler with every step. The transition is gradual, from the absolute stillness of the exterior night to the structured, human quiet of the frontier outpost. Inside the tower, the air is thick and heavy, smelling faintly of wood smoke, sesame oil, coarse wool blankets, and the sharp, metal tang of iron weapons. You move past the sleeping quarters, where dozens of soldiers rest on raised, heated brick platforms. Their slow, rhythmic breathing filling the stone chamber with a peaceful, resonant sigh. They are far from their ancestral homes, many drafted from the rich agricultural valleys of the south to serve a multi-year rotation on this cold, unforgiving edge. They do not dream of glorious battles. They dream of simple, warm things, of harvest festivals, of the smell of hot, spiced wine, and of the quiet, familiar sounds of their children's laughter. Their presence here is not an act of aggression, but a manifestation of defense, a human shield holding back the unknown. You ascend to the highest roof of the watchtower, a flat, open platform guarded by a low battlement. A solitary watchman stands here, his heavy, felt cloak wrapped tightly against the cold northerly wind. He keeps a steady watch over the vast, moonlit expanse of the steppe that stretches out before him. It is an empty, beautiful desolation, a realm of rolling grassland and dark, jagged peaks where nothing stays the same for long, and where the horizon itself feels dangerously fluid. The watchman's duty is one of absolute attention. He is not scanning the horizon for massive invading armies, but for the subtlest changes in the landscape. A distant spiral of dust, a sudden flight of frightened birds, the flicker of an unauthorized campfire. If he sees anything suspicious, he will not shout. He will not run. Instead, he will light a specific signal bundle on the large fire basket beside him. Depending on the time of day, he will produce either smoke or fire, a silent, optical signal that will be seen and repeated by the next tower miles away, and then the next, passing the message with incredible speed, transforming a solitary observation into a coordinated empire-wide response within hours. It is a system of profound, silent communication, a way of making the vastness of the frontier manageable through light and awareness. You leave the frontier outpost, descending the mountain path and moving inward, away from the border and toward the agricultural heartland of the ancient Eastern civilization. The rugged, rocky landscape slowly softens, the jagged peaks giving way to rolling hills of soft, yellowish-brown earth, a landscape that feels strangely fluid and impermanent. You have entered the Loess Plateau, a massive, unique region covered in a thick layer of fine, wind-blown silt that has accumulated over millions of years. This is the cradle of Eastern civilization, a landscape where the soil is so soft that a river can carve a canyon hundreds of feet deep in a single geological heartbeat. The air here is heavy, thick with the scent of the soft, powdery earth, catching the cool silver radiance of the moon and turning the entire world into a spectrum of yellow, brown, and gold. The Loess is a double-edged sword. It is incredibly fertile, allowing for massive, stable agricultural societies to flourish. But it is also exceptionally unstable, prone to massive erosion and collapse, creating a landscape that demands constant human labor to maintain order, a mirror of the society that grew from its soil. As you walk through these soft, eroded canyons, the path leads you toward a massive, silent force that dominates the region, and is the ultimate architect of this entire civilization. The Yellow River. At night, the river is a dark, powerful, and majestic sight. Its waters thick with a yellow lush silt that gives it its name, creating a current so dense that it is said to be 2 parts water and 1 part earth, a flowing river of liquid mud. The Yellow River is known by 2 powerful titles in Eastern lore. It is the Mother River, the source of all fertility and life for the massive populations that live in its valley. But it is also known as China's Sorrow, because of its absolute, terrifying unpredictability. Unlike the predictable floods of other great river civilizations, the Yellow River does not flood regularly. Instead, it shifts its massive channel entirely, breaking through its levees and finding a new path to the sea, often hundreds of miles away, wiping entire cities and civilizations off the map in a single cataclysmic season. The history of the civilization is not one of conquering nature, but of trying, with limited success, to coexist with this powerful, chaotic, and beautiful force. There is a legendary figure associated with the management of this chaotic river, a figure known across Eastern lore as Dau, or Yu the Great. In the semi-mythical prehistory of this civilization, the Yellow River was in a state of constant, devastating flood. Massive lakes covering the land, cutting off human settlements, and plunging the world into a state of watery chaos. A series of previous kings had attempted to solve the problem using a strategy of defense, building massive dams and levees to hold back the water. But the river simply broke through them, its anger only increasing with the suppression. When Dau was given the task, he spent 13 years traveling the river from its source in the mountains to the sea. He did not build a single dam. Instead, he studied the natural flow of the water. He looked at the topography of the land and realized that the problem was not the water itself, but the lack of an easy path to the ocean. So, Dau mobilized massive, collective armies of laborers, armed not with weapons, but with shovels and chisels. He led them in digging a vast, coordinated network of canals, channels, and spillways, designed not to suppress the river, but to guide it, creating alternative pathways so that when the floods came, the water could flow safely around the settlements and into the sea. He understood that true wisdom lies in cooperating with natural forces, not in opposing them. The soft, yellowish earth of the Lars Plateau holds another ancient secret, one that is deeply connected to the core values of this entire civilization. Hidden deep within the dried riverbeds and mountain roots is jade, in particular, a beautiful, opaque, milk-white variation known in lore as mutton fat jade, a stone that has been revered in the East for over 5,000 years, and is considered more valuable than gold or diamonds. The ancient East developed a profound and unique philosophy around this single stone. Jade is tough, it is exceptionally difficult to break, and yet, it is surprisingly soft. A skilled craftsman with infinite patience can carve it into impossibly intricate, fluid designs. To the Eastern philosophers, jade was the perfect physical metaphor for the concept of or virtue. They argued that a noble person, a true sage, should be like jade. They should have a resilient, unyielding core of integrity, but this inner strength should be perfectly matched by an outer exterior of softness, patience, and compassion. True power, they believed, is not the ability to dominate, but the ability to remain flexible, fluid, and virtuous. Despite the immense pressures of the world, you walk through the soft, eroded landscape until you arrive at a small, silent village nestled in a natural lice amphitheater. This is a traditional Yaodong village, a community of cave dwellings carved directly into the soft lice cliffs. It is a remarkably stable and efficient form of architecture, providing a warm, insulated sanctuary during the bitter winters and a cool, refreshing refuge from the blistering summer sun. The air in the village is still, smelling of sweet, cooking fires, of dried corn, of wood smoke, and of the unique, soft scent of the lush earth. It is completely dark, save for the faint, warm amber glow flickering behind a single paper window. As you peer through the open doorway of one Yaodong home, you see a small, domestic scene wrapped in a profound, protective peace. An elderly man and woman are sitting on their raised, heated brick platform. They are not speaking, simply sitting together in the silence of the night. The elderly woman is carefully mending a coarse wool blanket, her hands moving with a slow, rhythmic patience, while the elderly man sits beside her, holding a simple, unglazed clay bowl of hot water. His eyes closed, his expression filled with a deep, content serenity. This is the core of Eastern life. A focus not on the grand, external achievements of the empire, but on the quiet, internal rhythms of family, of duty, and of being present in the moment. The philosophy of the civilization was not just one of grand cosmic laws, but one that applied to the most practical, daily aspects of existence. It was deeply agricultural, rooted in the precise management of water and the absolute, unrelenting cycles of the seasons. Their calendar was an essential philosophical text. They did not divide the year into arbitrary months, but into 24 solar terms, precisely named to mirror the agricultural needs of the land. Titles like beginning of spring, awakening of insects, rainwater, and great cold. This philosophy emphasized a profound alignment between human activity and the movements of the cosmos. They believed that to achieve prosperity, peace, and health, a society had to synchronize its actions with the precise timing of the earth. If you sowed too early, the frost would kill the seeds. If you sowed too late, the heat would scorch the young stalks. True wisdom was not innovation or rebellion against the natural order, but absolute, precise adherence to it. The farmer working in the field, the scholar studying in the library, and the king managing the empire were all engaged in the same fundamental task, aligning their will with the will of heaven. You leave the village and return to the banks of the Yellow River. The night is now moving toward its final hours. The dark, silt-heavy waters flow past you with a steady, powerful, and hypnotic sigh, a sound that has remained unchanged through the rise and fall of countless dynasties. This river is the true author of this civilization's history, its chaotic, unpredictable energy constantly challenging the human desire for order, forcing this society to develop unique strategies of flexibility, of collective labor, and of profound cooperation to survive. The ancient East did not see themselves as masters of nature. They did not seek to pave over the earth or conquer the river. They sought to harmonize with it. They built their walls. They dug their canals. They defined their virtues, not as an opposition to the world, but as a graceful way of flowing within it. They knew that the frontier would eventually crumble, that the river would eventually shift, and that the jade would eventually return to the dust, but they also knew that the truths they had discovered, the beauty of virtue, the power of collective labor, and the deep peace of stillness, were as eternal as the river itself. Let your own awareness settle now. As the Great Wall, the Yellow River, and the Lais Plateau begin to slip into their well-earned rest, the frontier guards keep their vigil. The river flows to the sea. The farmers dream in their yardongs, and the eternal stone sages keep their watch over the world. Everything is in its proper place. Everything is aligned, and the deep wisdom of the frontier whispers that you, too, are exactly where you need to be. Let go of the miles, let go of the day, and drift down into the quiet, deep sanctuary of sleep. Part 6. The churning of the stone ocean and the city of floating towers. Let the dusty, ochre light of the Lais Plateau and the vigilant shadows of the frontier wall fade gently from your mind now, as we begin a slow, drifting descent back toward the lush, warm latitudes of the deep tropical south. We are moving away from the empire of structured earth and towards a realm where civilization did not fight the water, but learn to dance upon its surface. We are approaching the great, alluvial floodplains of the Mekong Basin. A vast, emerald world where the land breathes in alignment with the breath of the monsoon. The year remains suspended in the quiet pre-1800s, an epoch when the great riverborne capitals of Southeast Asia were at the zenith of their sophisticated engineering, mastering the flow of water to create grand, stone monuments that defined the human relationship with the cosmos. You are drifting aboard a covered cargo barge, slipping quietly down one of the wide, flat distributaries of the Mekong River at midnight. The air is radically different here. It is heavy, thick, and almost alive, swelling with the intense, ripe fragrance of night-blooming jasmine, the sharp tang of wild galangal, and the deep, rich smell of the wet, fertile mud that is the foundation of all life in this valley. A soft, warm ground mist has risen from the surface of the river, blurring the line between the dark water and the darkest sky, creating a dreamy, boundless landscape where your vessel feels suspended in a cosmic void. If you listen closely, past the gentle, rhythmic lap of the river against the wooden hull, you can hear the profound sound of the tropical night. A dense, overwhelming tapestry of insect life. Cicadas and crickets and tree frogs creating a constant, soothing thrum of static electricity that resonates deep within your own awareness. The boatman, an old man whose skin is as weathered as the teak planks of his barge, navigates by the subtle feel of the current rather than by sight. He guides the craft toward a large, hidden confluence, where the river meets the vast, inland ocean known in lore as the Tunnel Sap. It is one of the natural wonders of the Eastern Hemisphere, a lake that performs a paradoxical, rhythmic dance with the seasons. In the pre-1800s, this was the great clock of the civilization. During the long, dry months, the lake drains out into the river. But when the fierce monsoons arrive, the river swells so dramatically that it reverses its flow, pushing its waters back upstream and flooding the lake, causing it to grow 4 times its dry season size, submerging entire forests and defining the agricultural limits of the empire. You are entering the lake during its dry phase, and as the mist lifts, you see a spectacular sight. A city built entirely upon the water. This is a floating village of 1,000 traditional stilt houses, their thatched roofs catching the cool silver radiance of the high full moon. They are not merely floating, they are built upon immense pillars of hardwood, raised 30 feet above the mudflats, looking like an army of long-legged insects patiently waiting for the waters to retain. Below them, the dry lake bed is crisscrossed by a network of narrow canals, the streets of this aquatic society. Small oil lamps, filled with the pressed oil of the prahok fish, flicker in 1,000 windows, casting long, amber reflection trails across the exposed mud, defining a community that has learned that true resilience is not found in fighting the natural cycles, but in elevating yourself above them. You leave the main river and enter a monumental, artificial channel that cuts through the jungle with absolute mathematical precision. This is no mere irrigation canal. It is a grand, royal waterway, designed to handle the arrival of massive royal barges and the transport of immense stone blocks. As you drift down this structured waterway, the architecture of the water management system changes. The earthen banks give way to structured, terraced stone staircases descending into the channel, defining a civilization that saw water not merely as a resource, but as a sacred element that deserved to be framed in stone. You arrive at the edge of the Barry, one of the grandest water engineering projects of the ancient world. It is a colossal, rectangular man-made reservoir, stretching 4 miles in length. Its surface is a flawless, dark mirror perfectly reflecting the starry cosmos above, so vast that looking across its surface at midnight, the distant banks are invisible, creating an illusion of floating on an infinite sea. The philosophy behind the Barry was profound. The eastern hydraulic engineers of this basin understood that to sustain a monumental city in a landscape of extremes, they could not rely on unpredictable rains. They had to capture the entire flow of the monsoon, store it in these grand basins, and distribute it with absolute precision through a network of canals that operated entirely by gravity. The barriery was not just a utility. It was a physical manifestation of a king's primary duty: to tame the chaos of nature and transform it into a predictable, life-giving order. You continue to follow the structured canal inland, toward the very heart of the royal capital. The jungle begins to recede, replaced by structured agricultural lands and the first signs of built monumentalism. You arrive at the Great Moat, a wide, square perimeter of water that encircles the main temple complex, a structured barrier that was considered essential to both military defense and sacred geometry. A grand, wide causeway built of massive, interlocking sandstone blocks crosses the moat, guided by rows of high, dark stone pillars, and leading toward a colossal, five-towered silhouette rising against the indigo sky. Angkor Wat. This is the great stone masterpiece of the Khmer Empire, built in the pre-1800s to serve as a physical representation of the spiritual heart of the universe. It is a temple mountain, an immense, step pyramid constructed entirely without mortar. Its thousands of volcanic and sandstone blocks held together by gravity and a complex system of mortise and tenon joints. A mountain of stone built upon a foundation of water. The engineers understood a fundamental paradox. In a landscape of heavy, shifting clay, the only way to build a monumental stone structure that would not collapse under its own weight was to keep the soil beneath it perfectly saturated with water. The massive moats and reservoirs surrounding the temple were not just decorative, they were the essential hydraulic engine that maintained the soil pressure, anchoring the stone mountain down into the earth. The stability of the sacred was dependent upon the stability of the water. You walk across the stone causeway, your bare feet smoothing against the cool, interlocking sandstone. Entering through the grand, outer gateway and moving into the inner compound. The space is immense, wrapped in a profound, architectural stillness. As your eyes adjust to the low, flickering lamplight, you realize that the walls of the outer galleried corridors, which stretch for half a mile, are completely covered in an intricate, continuous ribbon of bas-relief carvings. These are not just decorative patterns. They are an ancient library of spiritual lore, a visual narrative telling the grand stories of the sacred East. There is a legendary scene carved into the southern gallery, a relief that is essential to the lore of this water-based civilization. It is the churning of the Sea of Milk, a massive, detailed carving depicting a grand, cosmic tug-of-war. On one side, 54 divine figures are pulling at the head of a giant, multi-headed serpent, Vasuki, while on the opposite side, 54 demon figures are pulling at the serpent's tail. They have wrapped Vasuki around the cosmic Mount Meru, and by pulling it back and forth, they are churning the waters of the primordial ocean. The goal is to produce the Amrita, the nectar of immortality. It is a perfect metaphor for the reality of this civilization. It was a society defined by a creative tension. The endless back-and-forth cycle of the monsoon, the interplay of land and water, and the divine effort required to transform chaotic nature into sustainable culture. The bas-reliefs glorify not just the divine, but the immense, collective human effort required to sustain life in the jungle. Leaving the galleried corridor, you ascend a steep, rock-cut staircase, moving into the central, elevated sanctum of the temple, and arrive in a spacious inner courtyard. Hey, a group of elderly Khmer priests are sitting in a circle on the cool stone flags, engaged in the art of sacred chanting. This is a practice that in the East was not treated as performance, but as a form of sound engineering designed to resonate with the underlying frequencies of the cosmos. The chant is carried out in low, resonant, guttural tones, a rhythmic, repetitive flow of ancient Pali and Sanskrit phrases that seems to dissolve into the very stone structure of the temple. They are reciting the complex texts of the Triveda, maintaining a sonic legacy that has been passed down orally for thousands of years. By maintaining this steady, unchanging rhythmic sound, they believed they were anchoring the cosmic harmony down into the very center of their empire. It was an attempt to create a space where the noisy, chaotic movements of human history could be brought into alignment with the steady, unchanging order of the gods. As you sit in the corner of the courtyard, surrounded by the massive stone towers and the enveloping sound of the chant, the chatter of your own mind grows quiet, completely absorbed into the monumental stillness of the stone and the sound. You walk to the edge of the elevated terrace, standing at the highest point of the central sanctuary, looking out over a monumental vista of the jungle landscape at midnight. The view is overwhelming. From this height, the grand city of Angkor, the largest pre-industrial city in the world, is invisible, swallowed entire by the dark, undulating ocean of the tropical rainforest. Only the stone towers of the great temples rise above the canopy, looking like a grand cluster of floating stone cities resting upon a sea of green. The philosophy of these builders was rooted in the concept of microcosm and macrocosm. They believed that the central temple was a physical manifestation of Mount Meru, the sacred mountain at the center of the universe. The surrounding walls were the mountain ranges that bordered the world, and the massive moats and reservoirs were the cosmic oceans that contained all life. By building a city that was a perfect replica of the spiritual topography of the universe, they believed they were creating a permanent, stable gateway between the human world and the divine. It was a monument to non-duality, a place where the barrier between the finite human mind and the infinite cosmic source was dissolved into a single, breathtaking stone symmetry. Standing on this high terrace, the world feels incredibly ancient, yet entirely vital. The damp, warm night air brushes against your face, carrying the scent of wild orchids and the deep, rich smell of the jungle. You realize that the people who built this massive library of stone and water did not view themselves as masters of nature. They did not seek to pave over the earth or conquer the jungle. Instead, they sought to harmonize with it. They knew that kingdoms would eventually fall, that the jungle would grow back over the stone terraces, and that the grand water channels would eventually fill with silt. But they also knew that the truths they had discovered, the nature of the mind, the beauty of compassion, and the deep peace of stillness, were eternal. They were writing not for their own glory, but for you, so that thousands of years later, an individual sitting in a completely different world could look back, listen to their words, and find the same harbor of peace. The stone sages carved upon the walls do not despair at the passing of time. They simply keep their eternal, compassionate watch, knowing that the water continues to flow, the jungle continues to breathe, and the wisdom of stillness is always accessible to those who choose to pause and listen. The deepest hours of the night are now beginning to pass. The intense, velvety blackness of the sky is turning into a soft, translucent charcoal along the eastern ridge of the jungle basin. The stars are beginning to lose their sharp, diamond brilliance, fading slowly into the rising light like drops of water disappearing into a dry sponge. A cool, pre-dawn wind sweeps across the roof, carrying the sharp, fresh scent of the jungle flowers and the clean promise of a new day. Below in the villages on stilts, the small oil lamps are flickering out one by one. The priests in the courtyard are setting down their scriptures, and the grand stone city is settling into its quietest, most restful hour before the morning sun calls the world back to its labors. Let your own awareness settle down into this deep, protective silence. The barrier reservoirs continue to hold the monsoon water. The sacred chants resonate through the stone walls. The massive towers float upon the jungle sea, and the deep wisdom of the water whispers that you, too, are exactly where you need to be. Let go of the journey. Let go of the hour. and drift down into the quiet, deep sanctuary of sleep. Part 7. The Garden of Stillness and the Mountain of Whispering Pines. Let the humid breath of the Mekong and the colossal stone echoes of Angkor fade gently from your mind now, as we begin a slow, upward ascent, moving from the tropical floodplains toward the crisp, cool island archipelagos of the deep northeast. The air changes its character completely. It is no longer heavy and dense, but sharp, light, and carries the clean, purifying scent of cold mountain springs, damp cedarwood, and the dry, smoky fragrance of autumn leaves burning in the distance. You are approaching a realm where the raw, chaotic forces of nature are not fought with massive engineering, but are met with a sophisticated, minimalist human grace. A landscape of volcanic peaks, misty valleys, and hidden, quiet monasteries. The year is still suspended in the tranquil pre-1800s, an epoch when the great island shogunates of the East were tamed inward, cultivating a profound, hermetic stillness and defining the aesthetics of impermanence. You are walking along a narrow, winding trail composed of smooth, gray river stones, damp with a persistent, ethereal morning mist that clings to the ancient cedar and cypress trees like a veil of spun silver. The path is ancient, its edges softened by a rich, vibrant carpet of green moss that seems to hold the quiet history of 1,000 pilgrims within its soft, velvet texture. The sound is a profound, structured quiet, not the absence of noise, but a composed symphony of subtle sounds. The distant, hollow clack of a bamboo water pipe, the soft, rhythmic sigh of wind moving through the needles of high pines, and the crunch of an occasional dry leaf beneath your sandaled foot. It is a place designed for introspection, a landscape that does not shout with grandeur, but whispers with a profound and comforting depth. You follow the mossy path until it opens into a clearing, revealing the unassuming entrance to a secluded mountain temple complex. This is the domain of a philosophy that found enlightenment not in grand monuments or complex scriptures, but in the simplest, most everyday actions, and in the profound, underlying stillness of nature itself. This is the world of Zen. These builders did not try to construct stone mountains to reach the sky. They tried to find the entirety of the sky inside a single drop of rain. You arrive at the outer gate. It is not built of imposing rock, but of weathered, dark timber, sliding rice paper screens, and a heavy, elegantly curved roof covered in gray clay tiles. Its architecture designed not to dominate the landscape, but to blend seamlessly into the rocks and trees surrounding it. It is a place that values the rustic, the worn, and the imperfect. An aesthetic known in lore as wabi-sabi, the beauty of things that are impermanent, incomplete, and humble. You cross the threshold and enter the quiet inner compound of the temple, and are guided toward a small, rustic pavilion nestled near a mountain stream. Inside, a different kind of ritual is unfolding, not with grand chants or dramatic sacrifices, but with the highly stylized, meditative choreography of the tea ceremony. Two figures sit in perfect, relaxed posture on immaculate tatami mats, their simple, dark kimonos illuminated by the soft, cool morning light filtering through a paper screen. They are observing the four core principles of the way of tea: harmony, respect, purity, and tranquility. Every movement is slow, deliberate, and packed with significance. The precise angle of the bamboo water scoop, the sound of the hot water being poured into the simple, dark ceramic bowl, and the silent, meditative whisking of the bright green matcha powder until a fine froth appears. It is an act of absolute mindfulness, a realization that the entirety of life, with all its joys, struggles, and impermanence, is contained within this single, momentary cup of hot, whisked tea. There is a dry, subtle humor found in the lore surrounding these Zen monasteries, and in the classic koans. the paradoxical riddles used to jolt the mind out of logical complacency. One koan tells of a scholar who visited a famous Zen master to inquire about the true meaning of the Dharma. The master welcomed him and began to serve tea. He poured the hot water into the scholar's cup, and then kept pouring. The tea overflowed, splashing onto the table and onto the scholar's robes, yet the master continued to pour. The scholar, unable to restrain himself, finally shouted, "Master, it is full. No more can go in." The Zen master calmly set down the pot and replied, "Like this cup, you are full of your own opinions, concepts, and judgments. How can I show you the Dharma unless you first empty your cup?" It is a witty, profound reminder that true wisdom begins not with accumulating knowledge, but with the willingness to unlearn and to empty the mind of its noise. You move away from the tea pavilion and arrive at the spiritual heart of the monastery, the great dry landscape garden, known in lore as a karasansui. It is a monument constructed entirely without water, a small, enclosed space measuring 50 feet long, containing nothing but carefully raked, fine white gravel, and a few irregularly shaped, moss-covered volcanic rocks. Yet, standing on the viewing veranda in the cool morning light, the mind is transformed. The raked gravel ceases to be stone and becomes a vast, cosmic ocean. The deep, parallel ridges formed by the gardener's rake are transformed into powerful, slow-moving currents. And the mossy rocks are no longer simple stones, but massive, distant islands or ancient mountains rising from the sea. The philosophy of this garden was born of absolute reduction. The ancient landscape artists understood that by stripping away all the noise of vegetation, water, and life, they could create a space of pure symmetry and balance, allowing the mind of the viewer to finally settle down and find the vastness of the universe inside a single, enclosed yard. It is a landscape designed not to be looked at, but to be looked through. A mirror for the stillness within yourself. The quietude of these mountain monasteries did not always exist in isolation from the often brutal realities of the outer world. In the pre-1800s, this island nation was governed by a sophisticated military elite, the samurai, a class defined by their absolute mastery of the blade and their adherence to a strict ethical code known as bushido, or the way of the warrior. And here lies the ultimate paradox of this culture. These fierce warriors, whose primary function was violence, were often the greatest patrons and practitioners of the delicate arts of the Zen temple. They found that the mental discipline required to practice the tea ceremony or to spend hours meditating on the dry garden was the exact same discipline required to stay calm and present in the chaos of battle. They sought to move in the world with absolute, unwavering control, a mental state known as mushin, or the mind of no mind, a state where actions are spontaneous, flawless, and detached from fey. The warrior and the blade becoming a single, fluid expression of the same cosmic will. You continue to walk through the temple grounds, arriving at a large, open courtyard surrounded by low, open-air training halls with smooth, dark wooden floors. These are the dojos, the places of the way. As you watch, a group of young warriors is practicing the art of kyudo, Zen archery. This is not a sport. It is a ritual form of moving meditation. They use asymmetrical bows made of laminated bamboo, longer than a human is tall, and arrows made of straightened reeds with eagle feather fletching. A lone archer steps forward to the shooting line. His movements are incredibly slow, stylized, and breath-controlled. He does not just lift the bow. He raises it with the weight of the entire universe. He knocks the arrow not with fingers, but with an absolute concentration that radiates from his core. He draws the massive bowstring back past his ear, his chest expanding with a slow, controlled breath. He does not aim with his eye. He aims with his spirit, holding the draw for several seconds in a state of intense, silent tension. And then, he allows the release to happen, the arrow flying forward not because he commanded it, but because the moment of perfect release had arrived. The philosopher who developed this form of archery argued that the true archer aims not at a target outside himself, but at his own ego, and that the true victory is won not when the arrow hits the bullseye, but when the self is finally dissolved into the act of the shot. The history of this island civilization is defined by a dynamic, creative tension between two powerful philosophical forces. On one side is Zen, the path of simplicity, discipline, and intentional stillness. And on the other is Shinto, the indigenous way of the gods. Shinto is not a philosophy of books or monasteries. It is a way of sensing and revering the divine presence that is considered to be flowing through all of nature. They call this divine essence kami. The kami are not abstract deities in the sky. They are the spirit of the ancient cedar tree, the power of the mountain spring, the energy of the thunder, and the soul of the high volcanic peak. While Zen seeks to cultivate an inner stillness through discipline, Shinto seeks to align the human heart with the harmonious, rhythmic flow of the natural world, to live in a state of pure, childlike gratitude for the beauty and vitality of the earth. It is a philosophy of presence, of purity, and of a deep, emotional connection to the land itself. The physical expression of this deep reverence for nature can be found in the most iconic architectural feature of the Shinto world, the Torii Gate. As you walk away from the temple and follow a new path leading toward the outer edge of the island, you find yourself moving along a rugged coastline of dark, volcanic cliffs. Suddenly, the path turns and reveals a grand, scarlet wooden Torii Gate, standing directly in the midst of the crashing waves of the Pacific Ocean, and framing the distant silhouette of the perfect volcanic peak of Mount Fuji, a mountain that in Shinto lore is considered the physical body of a very powerful kami. The Torii Gate is not a barrier. It has no doors. It is a sacred threshold, a symbolic gateway separating the mundane, familiar world of the town from the pure, vital, and powerful realm of the divine kami that is the open sea and the mountain. It is a monument to perception, a simple wooden structure that tells you that everything you are looking through is sacred, requiring you to pause, to offer respect, and to recognize that the land you are standing on is a living, breathing God. You walk along the coast until you arrive at the town harbor, the primary point of connection between the secluded mountain islands and the rest of the archipelago. The year is pre-1800s, an era when this nation was closed to the rest of the world, and its coastal communities thrived on inter-island trade carried out by a fleet of robust, traditional wooden cargo vessels known as kitamibyun. These were massive ships with heavy beams and unique, rectangular sails made of woven hemp, designed to handle the treacherous currents of the open sea. As you watch, the harbor is active in a composed, orderly way. Kitamibyun are settling into the harbor for the night, their crews slowly furling the large sails with a slow, coordinated rhythm. The docks are thick with the scent of pine tar, the salt spray of the ocean, and the sharp, smoky aroma of dried fish and steak. Small oil lamps are beginning to flicker in the coastal homes raised high on pillars to escape the tide. A community defined by its connection to the sea, finding its purpose not in grand exploration, but in the meticulous cultivation of its own home. There is a profound lesson in the unique and deeply reflective culture of these island realms. The people who cultivated the gardens of Zen and worshipped the kami of the mountains did not view themselves as masters of nature. They did not seek to pave over the earth or conquer the wilderness. Instead, they sought to understand their place within it. They knew that kingdoms would eventually fall, that the moss would eventually grow back over the stone verandas, and that the paper screens would eventually fade in the sun. But they also knew that the truths they had discovered, the beauty of virtue, the power of collective labor, and the deep peace of stillness, were eternal. They were writing not for their own glory, but for you, so that thousands of years later, an individual sitting in a completely different world could look back, listen to their words, and find the same harbor of peace. The stone sages carved upon the temple walls do not despair at the passing of time. They simply keep their eternal, compassionate watch, knowing that the water continues to flow, the jungle continues to breathe, and the wisdom of stillness is always accessible to those who choose to pause and listen. The deepest hours of the night are now beginning to pass. The intense, velvety blackness of the sky is turning into a soft, translucent charcoal along the eastern edge of the jungle basin. The stars are beginning to lose their sharp, diamond brilliance, fading slowly into the rising light like drops of water disappearing into a dry sponge. A cool, pre-dawn wind sweeps across the roof, carrying the sharp, fresh scent of the jungle flowers and the clean promise of a new day. Below in the villages on stilts, the small oil lamps are flickering out one by one. The priests in the courtyard are setting down their scriptures, and the grand stone city is settling into its quietest, most restful hour before the morning sun calls the world back to its labors. Let your own awareness settle down into this deep, protective silence. The berry reservoirs continue to hold the monsoon water. The sacred chants resonate through the stone walls. The massive towers float upon the jungle sea, and the deep wisdom of the water whispers that you, too, are exactly where you need to be. Let go of the journey, let go of the hour, and drift down into the quiet, deep sanctuary of sleep. Part 8, the cosmic dance and the infinite library of time. And so, we arrive at the final threshold of our long, deep journey, letting the misty pine forests and the silent, rock-cut gardens of the island archipelago fade gently into the archives of your mind. We have traveled across vast, horizontal oceans, traced the veins of mighty silt-heavy rivers, crossed high mountain passes, and rested in the warm mud-brick embrace of desert oases. And now, we return, full circle, not to a single geographical location, but to the deep philosophical heart that beats beneath the entire expanse of the ancient Eastern Hemisphere. We are entering the realm of final synthesis, a place where the barrier between the finite human mind and the infinite cosmic source is dissolved into a beautiful, harmonious, and everlasting stillness. The year remains pre-1800s, suspended in a timeless, protective quiet. An epoch when the greatest thinkers did not look outwards to conquer the world, but looked inwards to master the self. You are walking through the cloisters of a grand, ancient university and monastic complex. A sprawling library of the mind nestled somewhere in the fertile heartland where the philosophies of India and China began their deep, millennial dialogue. The air here is radically different. It is cool, profound, and thick with the scent of countless centuries of intellectual labor, smelling faintly of aged clarified butter used in thousands of ceremonial lamps, the sweet, resinous drift of sandalwood incense, and the distinct, dusty aroma of millions of ancient palm leaf and silk manuscripts slowly aging on their shelves. The sound is a composed symphony of subtle sounds. The distant, hollow clack of bamboo water clocks, the soft, rhythmic chanting of a dialectic class in a nearby hall, and the sigh of wind moving through the needles of ancient deodar pines. It is a place designed for the ultimate exploration, a safe harbor where one could look down upon the movements of human history with an objective, compassionate eye. You walk through the long, shadowed corridors, your bare feet smoothing against the cool stone floors that have been worn polished by the bare feet of countless generations of scholars. Every single wall is covered from floor to ceiling with wooden shelves, packed tightly with the bundled knowledge of the ancient world. Here are the early Buddhist sutras, written in meticulous Sanskrit on dried palm leaves. Next to them sit the complete, multi-volume commentaries on Vedic astrology. Nearby, elegant silk scrolls containing the intricate charts of Chinese medicine and acupuncture, and the profound mathematical treatises calculated by the early astronomers of the Indus and Yellow River valleys. It is a true universe of the mind, containing everything that humanity had learned, and everything it had forgotten, about the nature of existence. The ancient East developed a profound and unique philosophy around this single idea of knowledge. They did not view it as something to be hoarded or marketed, but as a sacred river that was passed down from parent to child, master to student, and civilization to civilization, in a continuous, unselfish flow. The librarians and scholars who lived here, working by the faint, flickering light of sesame oil lamps, were not just copyists. They were the guardians of the collective memory of the human species. They knew that if these leaves should bend, if this ink should fade, if these scrolls should rot, the world would lose its anchor in the past and be forced to drift blindly in the chaotic currents of the present. They were writing not for their own glory, but for you, so that thousands of years later, you could look back, listen to their words, and find the same harbor of peace. There is a legendary piece of folklore associated with this massive repository, a story told in low, respectful whispers by the student monks. They speak of a secret, inner vault, located in the deepest chamber of the library, where the single most important document in the entire world is hidden. The ancient chroniclers recorded that many centuries ago, a king, eager to prove his absolute authority over his subjects, ordered his engineers to find the one true definition of self, a complete, unchanging description of what it means to be alive. The sages and librarians of the realm labored for 13 years, translating every book, debating every philosophy, and studying every ritual. Finally, they produced a single, thin scroll, not of palm leaf, but of fine silk, and placed it within a golden box in the secret vault. The story goes that when the king finally opened the box, hoping to find a grand, absolute formula for power, he found that the silk scroll was completely blank. He was furious, believing the sages had failed, but the oldest librarian calmly replied, "The sages have not failed, Your Majesty. They have discovered the ultimate truth of the self, that it is not a static object. It is not a defined list. It is not a container that can be filled. It is a blank page, a field of pure, infinite possibility. And you, and every other living being, are the ones who must choose what to write upon it every single moment of your life." It is a powerfully quiet voice reaching out across the centuries, reminding us that true security is not found in being defined by the past, but in the fluid reality that we are the creators of our own experience. You leave the inner library vault, walking out into a large, central courtyard garden that forms the spiritual center of the academic complex. The garden is a masterpiece of sensory design, a small, deliberate paradise created in the midst of the architectural grandness. Heavy clusters of dark purple grapes hang from overhead wooden trellises, their leaves rustling softly in the midnight breeze. The ground is covered in a lush carpet of green clover, cooled by tiny stone channels that distribute water from the central basin to the roots of every plant. The scent here is intoxicating, a rich, layered fragrance of damp earth, mint, sweet fig leaves, and the subtle, powdery smell of night-blooming dust lilies. In the center of the courtyard stands the grand temple of the complex, a monumental step pyramid constructed without mortar, its thousands of volcanic and sandstone blocks held together by gravity in a complex system of interlocking joints, a mountain of stone built upon a foundation of water. The philosophy behind this building was rooted in the concept of microcosm and macrocosm. They believed that the temple was a physical manifestation of Mount Meru, the sacred mountain at the center of the universe, and that by walking around its terraces in a clockwise direction, they were aligning their own lives with the harmonious, rhythmic dance of the cosmos. As you stand before this giant figure, the chatter of your own mind grows quiet. completely absorbed into the monumental stillness of the stone and the sound. You walk across the stone causeway, your bare feet smoothing against the cool, interlocking sandstone, entering through the grand, outer gateway and moving into the inner sanctum of the temple, and arrive in a spacious inner courtyard. Hey! A group of elderly Hindu and Buddhist priests are sitting in a circle on the cool stone flags, engaged in the art of sacred chanting. This is a practice that in the East was treated not as performance, but as a form of sound engineering designed to resonate with the underlying frequencies of the cosmos. The chant is carried out in low, resonant, guttural tones, a rhythmic, repetitive flow of ancient Pali and Sanskrit phrases that seems to dissolve into the very stone structure of the temple, and contains the ultimate mantra of Eastern thought, a call to absolute, silent non-duality. Standing before this group, a different kind of ritual is unfolding, not with grand chants or dramatic sacrifices, but with the highly stylized, meditative choreography of the tea ceremony. As you watch, a master is carefully whisking a bright green matcha powder until a fine froth appears. Every movement is slow, deliberate, and packed with significance. The precise angle of the bamboo water scoop, the sound of the hot water being poured into the simple, dark ceramic bowl. It is an act of absolute mindfulness, a realization that the entirety of life, with all its joys, struggles, and impermanence, is contained within this single, momentary cup of hot, whisked tea. Leave the tea pavilion, walking into the great dry landscape garden, known in lore as a karasansui. It is a monument constructed entirely without water, containing nothing but carefully raked, fine white gravel, and a few irregularly shaped, moss-covered volcanic rocks. The philosophy of this garden was born of absolute reduction. The ancient landscape artists understood that by stripping away all the noise of vegetation, water, and life, they could create a space of pure symmetry and balance, allowing the mind of the viewer to finally settle down and find the vastness of the universe inside a single, enclosed yard. It is a landscape designed not to be looked at, but to be looked through, a mirror for the stillness within yourself. In the center of this dry garden sits a colossal bronze statue of the ultimate figure of Eastern cosmic law, the Nataraja, or the Lord of the Dance, a monumental representation of Shiva Nataraja, four-armed and magnificent, standing balanced on one leg within a massive ring of fire. The statue is captured in a dynamic, beautiful, and paradoxical stillness, his forearms held in precise mudras, a small drum in one hand, sounding the heartbeat of creation, a bright flame in another, signifying the fire of dynamic change and dissolution. One hand held in the gesture of fearlessness, reassuring the world, and the final hand pointing down toward his raised foot, signifying the ultimate path of liberation. He is not a static god. He is a cosmic force, a magnificent cosmic dance that continuously cycles through creation, preservation, and destruction, dynamic change and everlasting peace existing simultaneously in a perfect, harmonious balance. The ancient East did not despise the concept of change. They glorified it. They celebrated the dynamic nature of reality, knowing that true power is not the ability to dominate, but the ability to remain flexible, fluid, and virtuous despite the immense pressures of the world. Standing before this dynamic cosmic dancer, the ultimate secret of Eastern philosophy is revealed. The sages who carved this statue and who wrote the blank silk scroll, they understood that the universe is not a chaotic accident. It is not a battlefield of competing forces. It is a beautiful, structured, and everlasting mala, a cosmic wheel of time that continuously cycles through dynamic life and intentional stillness. They knew that kingdoms would eventually fall, that the jungle would grow back over the stone terraces, and that the palm leaves would eventually crumble into dust. But they also knew that the truths they had discovered, the nature of the mind, the beauty of compassion, and the deep peace of stillness, were eternal, and that the final destination of this cosmic dance was right here, right now, in the quiet, profound, and peaceful awareness that recognizes the beauty within it. The ancient East did not build monuments to reach the sky. They built monuments to define their own edges against the vast, chaotic flow of the northern steppes, and to find the entirety of the sky inside a single drop of rain. They were writing not for their own glory, but for you, so that thousands of years later, an individual sitting in a completely different world could look back, listen to their words, and find the same harbor of peace. The harbor is quiet now. The Great Wall stands firm. The Yellow River flows to the sea. The desert oases rest secure, and the massive stone temples float upon the jungle sea. The cosmic dancer continues his beautiful, silent, and harmonious dance, and the eternal stone sages keep their watch over the world. Everything is in its proper place. Everything is aligned, and the deep wisdom of the entire Eastern Hemisphere whispers at you, too, are exactly where you need to be. Let go of the journey, let go of the hour, and drift down into the quiet, deep sanctuary of sleep.